Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of my Cedar Point Recreation Park. It's been a little while, took a little bit of a break. We are back with some more of our Stage 7 builds, and that is all the stuff that's outside of the main park. And today we're going to be working on Cedar Point Shores, the water park at the back of the park, over by Magnum and everything. Apologies in advance if I call it Soak City by accident, that's what I always knew it as when I was a kid. Despite the fact that I didn't go here as a kid, and I still actually haven't been back here. Even on my most recent trip, didn't really have time to get back here or inclination. I'm not really a big water park fan in general. So building Cedar Point Shores has been quite a bit of a challenge so far, just because I'm really unfamiliar with it in general. Fortunately, I have been able to find quite a few different vlogs and photos and things from the water park from this season, which has been super helpful in getting more familiar with the area, what these buildings look like, what attractions are here now. Which has been really nice because there is a lot to do, a lot to look at. Google Maps doesn't give me a very good idea of a lot of these things either. A lot of that photography is very outdated. And there's also a lot of things that just aren't marked at all, both shops and rides. So yeah, there's quite a lot to build here. If you recall, a long time ago, back in an earlier episode, I built a bunch of placeholder water slides and a couple pools and things. But I didn't really have a good idea of the context of what those water slides and pools had, and it's time to go ahead and fill in those little gaps, add some shops and some facilities and things like that. You'll notice here off the bat, I did decide to let peeps into this area of the park. That was something I'd been debating for a while. Right now, I just have an underground path that leads them into this area. If I were to use the real life path, which has a separate entrance to this area of the park, it would result in a lot of lost guests and weird pathfinding issues. I want to avoid that as much as I can, obviously. So for right now, I've decided to just let peeps wander in here as part of the main park, so they don't have to leave the main park area in order to get to this part of the park, because everyone will get confused. It doesn't work that way. At some point, I have to find a way to hide the underground path or with a building or something, instead of the peeps just popping out of the ground like they do here. But that's for later when we have the rest of this thing built out. So yeah, since peeps are going to be able to walk around here in the water park, I decided to open up the few attractions I can that are going to be available for peeps. As of this episode, I have 2 open attractions: the Lazy River Runaway Rapids and the Big Dinghy Slide Storm Surge. So that's pretty cool, I guess. A lot of the attractions here are just slides, which aren't really going to be peepable, but those 2 did turn out to work out well for RCT. There's another Lazy River that I think is going to get opened up. But for this episode, we're only doing part of the water park. There's a lot more to do back here than I anticipated. So this episode is only going to cover a little bit of it, since I'm building rides and buildings all at the same time. And I also have to do the research at the same time to figure out exactly what all this stuff is. So doing all that research takes a long time, which makes building this part of the park slower than usual, which I anticipated. Don't really have a problem with it. That's just how it is. But yeah, there isn't really anything completely unusual over here. Kind of the same stuff that we've been building in other parts of the park. We've got our buildings with the drink refresh stations, a couple restaurants, a couple shops. Kind of the same stuff. It's just a matter of finding some good photos for reference. It's building the water rides themselves that's the huge challenge. Especially with things like the Lazy River that I mentioned earlier. You want it to have a very natural, flowy, curvy, organic-looking shape to it, which is kind of hard to do when you have a very rigid grid system, of course. Kind of the same problems we have with roller coasters, but it's a lot more obvious when it's a big area of water, and you can really tell when it looks jaggy on the edges. I've seen some really good techniques of people using like monorail track for walls for river rapids. That would probably work pretty well here. I'm not very good at it myself. I haven't really played around with it much for my own projects, but it's something I'll probably look into at some point later. Just because you want to have some kind of border there rather than just plain water butting up right against the grass. It looks very strange. I don't get far enough with today's work to get that put in place. Still got a lot more work to do in general for this part of the park. But even though it's still a work in progress, pretty happy with the way things are going so far. It's always pretty awkward to make these kinds of areas with like swimming pools and things. It's not really what RCT was intended for. So when you're faking it with tiles of water and bits of track for little beach chairs, it can look pretty awkward. And I think at this stage of Open RCT2, I don't think it's really possible to get a really good looking swimming pool area using just non-custom stuff. But I think what we have here so far isn't awful. I'm pretty satisfied with how things are working out, so far at least. Still need to make some more decisions on things like if I'm going to keep the tarmac paths here, or if I'm going to replace them with something else, a different texture to kind of differentiate this area from the rest of the park. If you look at satellite views of the water park, it's got a pretty light colored concrete path. A lot of the park has a pretty light colored concrete path actually, but it's even more obvious when you're over here. Like, they don't put tarmac paths down here for water parks. So I'm going to play around with some different options, see what I like as always. But I think that's going to do it for today. Again, this is just part 1 of our adventure here in Cedar Point Shores. A lot more to do still. There's a lot going on in this section of the park. I didn't anticipate that it would take me as long as it has been. But that's okay. It's just work that needs to be done, and I'm going to do it as long as it takes. But anyway, as always, if you've got any comments, questions, or suggestions, please let me know. Thanks for watching.